Today, I'm going to tell you a story, one that begins with a strange little whisper. I've been aching down there, but aching how? And aching where? No one dared to ask, and the only man who wanted to know never even wrote her a letter. A mail-order bride, a child who suddenly called her mama, and a secret, heavy enough to rattle an entire frontier town. Think you know where this story's going? Trust me, you don't. If stories like this stir something in you, don't forget to hit subscribe. We've got plenty more untold tales of the Old West filled with truth, heart, and just enough dust to keep your soul wandering. Now then, let me begin the story. The wheels of the stagecoach creaked under the weight of dust and doubt as it rolled across the endless Kansas plains. Inside, Isadora Quinn clutched a folded scrap of paper, her own handwriting smudged with age and worry. Her fingers trembled around the creases. The letter smelled faintly of lavender, but its words felt foreign now, written in a moment of fragile hope. She whispered to herself, voice barely audible over the wind, "If the man behind those letters isn't who he claimed to be, if it was all a lie, God help me, I've already run too far." Tucked inside her leather satchel was a bottle of laudanum prescribed by a city doctor who had looked at her with a mixture of pity and helplessness. "You'll never bear children," he'd said. The damage was too severe. His words still rang in her ears. But it wasn't the pain in her body that haunted her now. It was the fear of not being wanted because of it. Outside the coach window, the prairie stretched vast and gold under the setting sun, the tall grass dancing like a whisper of things unspoken. Back in a remote farmhouse several miles from the nearest town, Garrett Wynn was digging a post hole. Sweat clung to his shirt. He paused, wiped his brow, and looked toward the horizon like a man watching time itself fade. He hadn't said more than 3 words in the past 5 days, not since the fence gave out and the wind turned north. Solitude had wrapped itself around his life like a second skin. Eldon, his 10-year-old nephew, sat on the porch legs swinging a tattered book in hand. The boy had Garrett's eyes, but none of his quiet. Where Garrett had grown into a man of few words, Eldon was all questions, all heart. The mail arrived late that afternoon, brought by a dust-covered writer who barely paused to tip his hat. One envelope stood out among the bills and seed catalogs, cream-colored with soft handwriting and a faint scent of lavender. Garrett frowned. He hadn't sent no letter, but someone had written back. Inside was a carefully penned note. "Dear Ms. Wynn, your letters have touched me deeper than words can say. There is a kindness in your words, a softness beneath the grit. I would be honored to meet you in person. I arrive on the 17th by stage. Yours in hope, Isadora Quinn." Garrett blinked. He read it again, then a third time. The paper shook slightly in his hand. "Eldon," he called, voice tight. The boy looked up from his book, already guilty. "Come here." Eldon stood slowly, dragging his boots across the porch. "You know anything about this?" Garrett asked, holding up the letter. The boy hesitated. "I might have written her." Garrett's jaw clenched. What I used your name. Told her how kind you are, how you take care of me, how you built the chicken coop from nothing, how you talk to the horses like they're people. Eldon, I just thought maybe you needed someone. A woman. Someone to talk to. Someone who isn't me." Garrett exhaled slowly like steam from a cracked pipe. "How many letters?" 3, the boy admitted. "Maybe 4. Garrett sat down on the porch step, letters still in hand. He didn't speak for a long time. 2 days later, the stagecoach arrived. Garrett waited at the small depot, with dust on his boots and a knot in his gut. The horses neighed, the coach doors swung open, and there she was. Isadora stepped down with the elegance of someone trying not to be afraid. Auburn hair tucked neatly beneath a travel-worn hat, she looked around the dusty town like she was measuring it against her dreams and finding it smaller than hoped. Her eyes landed on Garrett. There was recognition, even affection. She smiled. "Mr. Wynne?" she asked. He nodded, removed his hat. "Miss Quinn." The words came hard. His voice rasped like it hadn't been used in days, which it hadn't. They stood in awkward silence for a breath too long. Then he said it. "I didn't write those letters." She blinked. "Excuse me, my nephew did. Without telling me." The world stilled. Isadora didn't speak. Her eyes flicked from Garrett's face to the worn letter in her hand. Her breath caught, but she didn't cry. She didn't run. After a long silence, she said, "I came all this way, and I don't have anywhere else to go." Garrett nodded once, slow and heavy. "You're welcome to stay. For now." He picked up her bag lighter than he expected and led her to his horse-drawn wagon. She climbed in beside him, her shoulders straight but taut. Eldon was waiting at home, excited, unaware of the storm he had set in motion. That night, the three of them sat around the dinner table in a silence thick with unspoken truths. Eldon chattered to fill it, telling her about the goats and the way the wind howled through the barn rafters. She smiled, but her hands trembled when she lifted her fork. Later, Garrett showed her to the small spare bedroom. Clean sheets, a cracked mirror, a wooden chest at the foot of the bed. "Good night, Miss Quinn." "Good night, Mr. Wynne." He closed the door gently. Alone in the room, Isadora sat on the edge of the bed, hands gripping the blanket. She reached for the bottle in her bag but stopped. Instead, she pressed a hand to her lower abdomen. Her fingers lingered there. She whispered into the dark, "I'm still aching, down there." And then she lay back, eyes open, waiting for sleep or something softer to come. Life on the homestead settled into a rhythm, but it was a rhythm that stumbled often. Garrett moved through his days with the same quiet purpose as always, feeding livestock, tending the fence line, fixing what needed fixing. But now, there was a fourth plate on the table, a new pair of shoes beside the front door, a whisper of lavender in the air. Isadora Quinn, for all her grace, walked like a woman who didn't quite believe she belonged. She was polite, helpful, and soft-spoken, but there was a distance in her eyes, like she was here in body, but her soul had stopped somewhere between the last town and the Kansas border. Garrett didn't ask questions. That wasn't his way. But he noticed things. How she rubbed her lower belly when she thought no one was looking. How she flinched slightly at sudden noises. How she never unpacked more than one dress. He kept those observations folded away in the back of his mind like old letters never sent. Eldon, on the other hand, was all sunshine and chatter. He adored her. It didn't take long. He started by showing her the chicken coop, then the goat pen, then his secret stash of marbles under the floorboards. He followed her around the house like a loyal pup, always asking questions, always smiling. One morning, while helping Isadora carry water from the well, Eldon slipped and called her Mama. The word fell like thunder. Isadora froze. Her hands tightened on the handle of the bucket. Garrett, who had just stepped onto the porch, caught the moment in full. I'm sorry," Eldon stammered. "I didn't mean—" Isadora smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's all right, sweetheart." Garrett's hands froze on the railing. It was just a word, just a slip, but it rang louder than any storm. That evening, Garrett sat beside the fire polishing his boots. He glanced at Isadora folding linens in the corner. Her movements were careful, methodical. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded without looking up. "Just tired." He didn't press. He never did. That night, the sky turned a deep green gray. Clouds rolled in, thick and low. Garrett could feel it before it hit something heavy in the air, a charge crawling under his skin. The animals felt it too. The horses shifted restlessly. Chickens clucked low and nervous. Garrett moved with practiced efficiency, securing the barn, checking windows, pulling Eldon inside. Isadora helped, though her hands trembled, as the first boom of thunder split the sky. Garrett caught her eye. There was fear there, deep old fear, but she didn't speak it. "Lanterns on the shelf," he said gently. She nodded and turned toward the kitchen, the glow of oil light chasing her shadow. The storm came hard. Rain hammered the roof. Wind clawed at the shutters. Lightning lit the room in stuttering flashes. Eldon huddled near the hearth, wide-eyed. Garrett sat close, calm on the outside, but his eyes kept flicking toward the kitchen. Isadora moved as if in a trance, tidying things that didn't need tidying, wiping a counter already clean. It was a woman's way of holding herself together through motion. Then came the sound. A soft cry, sharp and sudden. Garrett rose fast. Isadora stood gripping the kitchen table, her back arched slightly, one hand pressed hard to her side. Isadora. Her knees buckled. Garrett reached her just in time, catching her as she sank to the floor. "What is it?" he asked, breath quick. "Where does it hurt?" She tried to wave him off, but the pain pulled a whimper from her lips. Her whole body trembled. "It's nothing, just old hurt." Garrett lifted her gently. She didn't resist. Her weight in his arms was nothing, but it filled his chest with a pressure he didn't understand. He carried her into the spare room and laid her on the bed. Moonlight filtered through the window, painting pale light across her face. He fetched a damp cloth and dabbed her forehead. Her skin was cool, clammy. Her eyes opened slowly. "I've been aching," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the fading thunder. "Down there, since long before this place." The words were soft, but they cracked something open in him. Garrett sat quietly, unsure what to say. He wasn't a man of words, not for things like this. But he didn't look away. He didn't leave. She went on, as if needing to let it out before it buried her. "It comes and goes. But tonight, it was worse." He nodded slowly, reaching for the quilt at the foot of the bed. He pulled it up around her shoulders, tucking it in with keen care. "You're not alone," he said. Isadora stared at the ceiling. Her lips trembled. "I don't know how to stop hurting." Garrett looked down at his hands, hands that could mend fences, tame horses, kill if they had to. But they'd never been asked to hold someone's pain. "You don't have to stop," he said, voice rough but steady. "You just have to let it pass." Like a storm. Outside, the wind began to soften. Raindrops slowed their assault. The air eased. Inside, so did she. Garrett didn't leave her side. He sat by the bed until her breathing deepened, until her fists unclenched, until the room was quiet again. Morning broke with shy sunlight, peeking through clouds like someone peering out after a long cry. Garrett stepped outside, boots damp on the earth. Everything smelled clean, washed. Inside, Isadora sat at the kitchen table holding a cup of tea. She looked pale but peaceful. "Storm's over," he said. She gave a small nod. "I know." They said nothing more, but something between them had shifted. Not fixed, not healed, but changed like soil after rain, ready to hold a seed. The days after the storm passed quietly, almost too quietly. Kansas mornings stretched out golden and warm, the grass still heavy with dew. The wind carried the smell of damp earth and the promise of something changing. Garrett felt it in his bones, an unease like a train coming from far off, still silent, but certain. Isadora seemed lighter after that night. Not healed, no. She still winced sometimes when she thought no one saw, but she walked steadier. Her smiles, though rare, lasted longer. She helped Garrett with chores, learned how to pour feed and patch small tears in the barn walls. Eldon never left her side. Then the letter came. Garrett found it tucked between the daily paper and the feed catalog. No return address. Just her name written in careful, almost hesitant script. Miss Isadora Quinn. He handed it to her over breakfast, not thinking much of it. She paled the moment she touched the envelope. Her fingers hovered at the seal. Her breathing changed. "You all right?" Garrett asked, his voice low. Isadora stood, nearly knocking over her cup. "Excuse me." She walked out onto the porch without another word. Garrett and Eldon exchanged glances. A moment later, Eldon followed her as a shadow. From inside, Garrett could just make out her voice, a low whisper. Then a sharp gasp. Eldon stepped back into the kitchen a few minutes later. His small face was pale, his eyes wide. "She was crying," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "She said a name, Judge Thatcher." The name hit Garrett like a whip crack. He knew that name. Everyone in 3 counties did. Judge Silas Thatcher, wealthy, connected, untouchable. Rumors had long swirled around him like flies on a carcass, but no one dared speak them out loud. When Isadora returned, her face was dry, but her hands trembled. She sat down at the table without looking at either of them. "I suppose you heard," she said quietly. Garrett didn't nod, didn't speak. He waited. "I'll tell you some," she said. "But not all. Not yet." She looked out the window, eyes far away. "Back east, I was hired to tutor the son of a university professor. A boy named Miles. Bright, sweet, maybe too sheltered. I spent afternoons in their library, evenings, correcting essays. I was careful. Always careful." Her voice faltered. Garrett said nothing, though something inside him coiled tight. "But the professor," she swallowed. "He wasn't like his son." The room held its breath. He was charming, intelligent, knew how to make you feel seen, important. And then, well, I was stupid, naive. He promised me things. A place at the university, a future, a life. Garrett wanted to ask 100 questions. Where was the man now? Why hadn't she fought back? Why had the world let it happen? But all he could do was sit still and burn with a quiet rage he didn't know how to name. "When I found out I was pregnant, I went to him. Thought he'd keep his word. Thought." She laughed bitterly. "He said I misunderstood, that I was unstable, that I had imagined it all. Then he told my father, who'd once admired him, everything. His version." Eldon's fingers were clenched on the table edge. "Why didn't anyone stop him?" he blurted. "Did he hurt the baby?" Isadora flinched slightly, but she didn't look away. "My family. They were proud folk. Church-going. Reputation above all. They didn't ask if I was all right. They only asked if it was true." Isadora's eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. "I was forced into a clinic. Told it was the only way. Afterwards, they gave me a train ticket, a small purse of coins, and told me never to return." Qualency stretched long. Garrett's voice was gravel. "The professor." She looked at him then. "He's not a professor anymore." Her lips thinned. "He's Judge Silas Thatcher. He's coming to Kansas for a courthouse dedication. He'll be passing through this town." The walls seemed to contract around them. Garrett rose slowly, chair creaking beneath him. He walked to the window, stared out at the open fields. Eldon's voice broke the stillness. "Is he gonna hurt her?" Isadora didn't answer. Garrett turned. "Did the letter say he's looking for you?" She hesitated. "It didn't need to. Just said, 'I know where you are. I remember everything.'" And she pulled the letter from her apron pocket, handed it to Garrett. He read the final line. "We never finished our last conversation. Perhaps Kansas will give us the chance." His jaw tightened. The threat wasn't just in the words, it was in the arrogance, the certainty. He crossed the room in 2 strides. "Why would he do this now?" "Because he can," she said, her voice hard. "Because men like him always can." Garrett's fists clenched, then slowly released. "He won't touch you," he said. "I don't care who he is." She gave a weak smile. "You don't understand. This isn't just about me. He has power, friends in high places. The law bends for men like him." Garrett's voice was steel. "Then the law will bend the other way." He looked at Eldon, wide-eyed, confused but listening. "Take her to the barn. Show her the colt," he said gently. "I need to think." They left quietly. Garrett stood alone, staring at the letter left on the table. No name, no return address, just threat in ink. He remembered a time when he trusted the system, when he believed the world had rules and justice meant something. But that was before war, before loss, before long ceases and empty bids. Now he believed in something simpler. You protect what's yours. And right now they were his. He folded the letter, tucked it into his shirt pocket, and walked out into the sun. He had fences to reinforce, and ammunition to count. The heat of mid-morning drifted across the farm like a heavy blanket. Location flags in the field sagged. The relentless sun did nothing to lift the solemn mood that draped over the Tackett homestead like an invisible storm cloud. Garrett sat on the porch, arms trembling not with fatigue, but with the weight of the letter in his pocket. He watched Isadora buttering bread inside. Her hands were steady, but the woman kneading dough hid truths darker than the night sky. He glanced at Eldon, playing with the colt outside, laughter, a fragile thread, in a day, woven with tension. That afternoon a carriage with polished wheels and shiny brass came to the property gate. A hush fell. Isadora paused mid-step on the porch. Garrett and Eldon turned with her, as the carriage door opened, to reveal a man, dominating, polished, and unmistakably familiar. He introduced himself simply, Judge Silas Thatcher. He adjusted a glinting watch chain, tilted his head with warmth, as if greeting an old friend. But the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Quinn," he purred, voice smooth as silk. Isadora's face whitened. She held a dish towel tight. "Judge Thatcher," she said, voice steadier than he expected. The judge glanced at Garrett. "These are your farmhands?" he asked lightly, as though demanding a claim rather than answers. Garrett stepped forward. "They're people," he said quietly. "This is my property. Enjoy your welcome or don't." Thatcher's polite grin widened imperiously. He summoned Isadora away to the back porch. The moment the carriage rolled away, Garrett felt the wind shift, cooling the day, stirring trouble. In the still of the barn, with Eldon watching from a distance, Isadora leaned tremulously against the doorframe. Her voice when she spoke was quiet but firm. "He wants me to go back east, for my treatment. Or he'll say I kidnapped your nephew." Garrett's heart felt hollow. He pulled her gently to a bale of hay, sat beside her, the barn smell comforting in a way polished airs never could. "Treatment." His voice broke. He wants to call off a court case, or something worse." Isadora shook her head. "He's wealthy enough to push anything through, even a court." Her hands twisted the hem of her dress. "He told me no one would believe me back then, or now, and that he knows where you come from." Garrett's mouth went dry. He thought of all the guns stored in the lean-to, of old scars that ached in certain weather. But this was not a fight of bullets. This was a fight of the heart and law. That evening, Garrett barely spoke above a whisper. He ate cold stew, watched Eldon hum to himself. Isadora sat still, looking toward the horizon, perhaps imagining places where she could vanish. Later that night, Eldon passed the cracked bedroom door and heard Isadora whisper to herself, "Maybe I'm not meant to stay anywhere." The boy stood frozen for a moment. That one sentence turned over and over in his chest until it became something much heavier. The next morning, Garrett left before dawn without a word. He didn't leave because he doubted her, but because something in him, raw and unresolved, had to know. Could he give her the kind of future she deserved? Or was he still just a man, stitched together with war and silence, He rode for miles, his horse's hooves stirring dust and memories both. He needed time to outmatch his mind, to feel somewhere that wasn't a battlefield of trust and fear. He didn't go to the sheriff. He didn't go home. He rode until he came upon an old windmill, rotted in its frame, nothing left but rust and a broken blade spinning in a wind that fed on its failure. There he stopped. He thought of Eldon's face questioning and Isadora's pain. He judged that love was not about rescue without risk, but about presence even when afraid. When he returned 2 days later, dusk had softened the landscape into purples and grays. Eldon was waiting on the porch blanket around his shoulders. His eyes were red, swollen with tears. Eldon, Garrett's voice shook. Dazed, Eldon said, "I thought she was gone. I thought she left me." Garrett cradled the boy in his arms. "She didn't go anywhere." Then they found Isadora in the house, Goistes and a pull. Garrett sat with her eyes tired, full of the kind of love that bleeds heathel over broken things. "I need to trust again," he said, voice low. "Not everyone betrayed me. Not everyone." Isadora nodded, tears flowing freely now. "I need time to trust you," she whispered. He kissed her forehead. "We'll take that time." Days later, while Garrett was mending the fence, he heard horses approaching. Judge Thatcher rode up, servants in tow, guests in masks of civility. Garrett walked neath Thatcher's path, stopping to meet him on the dusty lane. "Good afternoon, Judge," Garrett said, steady. "What brings you to my land?" Thatcher's smile polished off. "I've come to finalize arrangements." Garrett steadied himself. "My property. My rules, Judge." The judge's voice was nothing but silk thread, polished but brittle. "I have your name, Isadora's, passed on record. But I also have yours." He leaned close. "Don't expect the law to be kind when you make claims." Garrett's heart thudded. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled. "Then we'll rewrite the law." He turned, strode back toward home. Eldon and Isadora stood side by side on the porch watching. As Garrett turned back to the porch, the wind carried the smell of wild sage across the field. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang, not loud but sure. And in that still moment, Garrett felt fear clear away, because love at its strongest was never daunted. The morning sun broke through the barn's slatted walls in soft golden rays, the kind of light that makes everything that's been broken feel like it might just hold together again. Garrett carried Eldon in his arms, the boy pressing his face against his shoulder. Garrett's own tears fell in silent drops down Eldon's hair, tears of relief, of love, of victory. "I'm never letting her go," Eldon mumbled into his shirt. Garrett answered nothing, because nothing needed saying. Instead, he carried the boy back toward the house, where Isadora stood at the porch doorway, pale but resolute, eyes glistening as she watched them approach. She didn't speak. She only opened her arms, and Garrett passed Eldon into her embrace. The three of them stood together in the golden hush, wrapped not in forgiveness, but something deeper, understanding. Word spread quickly that Judge Silas Thatcher would be attending a gathering in the town square that afternoon. Garrett paced the front yard, listening to Eldon's stammered worries. "Will he hurt her, Papa?" Garrett knelt beside him. "Not today." He fastened his belt, ran a hand through grass, still damp from morning dew, and felt the weight of what came next settle into him, the confrontation. Not with violence, but with the promise of protection delivered with some clarity. Isadora placed a hand on his arm. "You don't have to do this alone." Garrett shook his head slowly. "I know. That's why I'm not afraid." The town gathered under a big cottonwood in the square. Dust hung in the air, stirred by anxious feet. Heads turned as Judge Thatcher arrived, entourage in tow. He wore his arrogance like a suit. Garrett and Isadora stood side by side at one edge of the square, Eldon between them, gripping both their hands. Thatcher stood on the steps of the courthouse, flanked by two men with polished boots and sharper eyes. He raised a hand as if to calm an invisible wind. Garrett stepped forward. The crowd hushed. Judge Thatcher, he began, voice steady, echoing softly in the hush. You have come here not to honor this town, but to punish a woman who dared survive your betrayal. Thatcher arched an eyebrow. Mr. Wynne, you usually speak in half sentences. I'm surprised. Garrett held his look. You've used the law to stand on high above everyone else. But no more. He turned to face the gathered townsfolk. Isadora Quinn is a woman of courage, not shame. You all know it. She's raised this boy with strength. This town would do any man proud to call kin. A murmur rose among the crowd, warm questioning, then supportive. Thatcher's lips thinned. Your loyalty is misplaced, he said coldly. She is not of this place. Garrett stepped forward. She is new. And she belongs to this soil as much as any of us, maybe more. Then unexpectedly Miss Howard, the schoolteacher, stepped forward. I've seen that boy thrive under her care, she said. He's gentle, kind, and brave. A shopkeeper nodded. She came here with nothing and gave everything back. An elderly farmer stepped up among the crowd and cleared his throat. I say we don't want a man in our town who brings shame, especially here. There was a slow clap. Then others rose in agreement until the crowd erupted in quiet but fierce assent. Thatcher stood frozen as the whisper of disapproval grew louder, then harsher. His veneer cracked, and doors began to close behind him figuratively and in carriage stalls. You will leave, Garrett, said quietly as the carriage door slammed and inches of space opened. Thatcher glared, then stiffly lifted his hat, in a motion lacking any courtesy. He rode away. The dust behind his carriage seemed thinner than it should have been, as though even the ground was done with him. When the dust settled, the world felt softer. Isadora went back into the square and wrapped Garrett in a quiet embrace. Eldon ran between them, wrapping his arms around both their legs in one glorious tangle. I'm sorry, Isadora whispered to Garrett, her voice thick. He pulled her closer. No. You're home now. Eldon pressed his face into bathed in warmth, giggling, delighted to be part of something healing. Back at the homestead, life resumed in gentle song. Isadora planted seeds in the garden, the pink of sweet peas, the yellow of marigolds, the hope in rows of lavender. Garrett repaired the porch swing's chain. Eldon played tag with local children, laughter soft but full of life. The ranch, once a refuge for silence, now echoed with sound the best kind. They ate together, worked together, dreamed together. At night, Garrett read from old books, his voice steady under the oil lamp's glow. Isadora sat beside him, her head on his shoulder. Eldon would fall asleep mid-sentence, nestled under a quilt his mother had once sewn. Then came the morning. Garrett knelt in the garden, hands muddy, heart steady. He pulled something from his pocket, a ring modest but true. Isadora, he said, this place was just land before you. Now it's home? Will you stay always? Her eyes filled with tears, but her hands didn't shake as she reached for his. Yes, she said, yes. Eldon ran from the porch, arms wide, crashing into both of them with a laugh. I knew it, he cried. Garrett pulled them both close. We're not perfect, he whispered, but we're real. The days grew longer. The garden bloomed. The old barn finally got a new roof. Laughter replaced tension. Music replaced silence. One evening, as the sun dipped low, they sat on the swing, Garrett, Isadora, and Eldon, sprawled between them, sleepy and sun-kissed. Isadora looked out over the field, her voice soft. It still hurts sometimes, down there. Garrett turned concern in his eyes. She smiled faintly, but not like before. Garrett nodded. That's because now it's making room for something new. She leaned her head on his shoulder. The porch creaked gently beneath them. And in that still moment, Beneath skies turning lavender amid the smells of sage and soil, they found peace. They had written a new story, not one free from pain, but one in which pain no longer held the pen. Pain doesn't always fade. It settles like dust on old floorboards. But sometimes love comes along and plants something new in that same soil. In the quiet ache of Isadora and the silent strength of Garrett, we don't just find a love story, we find a second chance. A place where the past is still there, but no longer in control. That's the West I believe in. Not the wild one, but the tender one. The kind built on healing, on truth, and on holding each other through the dust.